Hello and welcome back to the One Shot Show where GMs go to level up. My name is Matt and I'm joined by new co-host Paddy. How you doing, Paddy?
I'm doing very well. Happy to be here.
It's a damn shame that it's Paddy and not Pat.
I know.
It is short for Patrick, yeah?
It is short for Patrick.
Because Matt and Pat, given that we have, this is not a joke, we have the same surname.
We do. We're both Carrolls.
That would have been
Carolls.
Yeah, that would have been fascinating. And I always had to correct the spelling. People are like, like Steve Carell. I'm like, have a think about what you just said and what I just said.
Yeah.
And they go, like Christmas Carol. I'm like, no.
Like Lewis Carroll.
Well, yeah, like Lewis Carroll. I hate that guy. We are talking today about surviving the TPK, coming fresh off the back of our last episode, where we talked about failing forward and sort of ended that with the note that a TPK, a total party kill, is like the ultimate form of quote-unquote failure in the narrative of your game. The question is then, where do you go from there? The party wipes, what now?
It's a curious question. In the lead into this one, I've written down, I've never TPK'd a party. Have you TPK'd a party?
Not completely,
okay.
but almost.
Yeah, and I have been a player who's been TPK'd, but I've never been on the Dungeon Master's side of that, with a group of like 4 or 5 people, maybe you're 6 months, maybe you're 3 years deep, and then that event occurs. In terms of failing forward, it would be one of the greatest challenges that a GM would face.
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of interesting ways to address this, right? First of all, like in the moment, what do we do? Like while we're at the table, it's just happened. Like what now in a very real functional sense? You might only be an hour and a half into the 3 hours you'd set aside. And then there's the wider, what do you do with the narrative of the campaign if you want to preserve it and things like that? So I'm keen to kind of break down all of those things. So
for me, I've got to dial back first to go was a TPK on the cards for your campaign to begin with? Is this because for me, the way that I talk about player death now most often is when I'm starting a new game with a new group of players and we go, okay, so what are we comfortable with? What do we want to play with? And what do we want to do should this happen? Should the worst occur?
In the same way that you had when you had the conversation about like a character death in the first instance, and then the fact that may then carry on outward to a whole TPK. I'm very clear with my players in that regard. I like to run a pretty, shall we say, hearty game. I don't like saying deadly game because that makes it sound like it's deadly on purpose, like I'm trying to kill them. It's not adversarial, but like I want that threat to be extremely real at all times. Absolutely. Because that's where a lot of the excitement comes from for me and my players. It's totally a possibility. It is unusual for me to get through a campaign without multiple character deaths, and sometimes those come in batches.
Yes.
2 get downed in an encounter, and that's it. But yeah, funnily enough, never actually had the full TPK, but the expectation and the possibility is always there in my games.
I do have a little caveat because I did at one point. All of the players at the table died, but it was in a West Marches campaign. So it's a different beast. It's a different beast. And also, in that particular instance...
Asterisks on that. We'll talk about West Marches in a separate episode.
I'm so excited. It's the most long-form play I've ever done is in that style. It was 2 players who were both prospective heirs to a throne. They had discovered this over the course of previous games, and they went, we want a 2-hander where our characters hash it out. And before that game... in digital, but also at the table, I went so let's go, let's clear what your character's intentions are going to be and what we're going to be comfortable with at the table. Both of those players were like,
two enter, one leaves.
Absolutely, that was the feeling. It was we're prepared for that. And I threw a third layer on top, which is there was an NPC who they didn't know was also an heir to the throne, and then they started an encounter, and then that NPC entered. And then it turned into a 2PK with both of those guys going down.
Wonderful.
But it was because we'd established that 2 enter, 1 leave, we were all completely on board for that moment of we're going to go down. It became this cornerstone moment of the campaign. And then for them, creating new characters, introducing them to the West Marches, and no one else in the player base knowing what happened to your past 2 characters was this huge, beautiful rug pull. Yeah.
And I guess something that's interesting there that I think that's a really good way to get into this is structurally that campaign can survive a TPK. So, if the topic of this episode is surviving the TPK, often step 1 of that is actually baked into the structure of the campaign. And often there's more tools for survival than you might think, I find. So West Marches is a classic one. For those who are unfamiliar with the format, generally speaking, it's one great big living world with a whole bunch of different characters who might sort of group up in different permutations and combinations over the course of a campaign. That can handle a TPK because if one group of 5 adventurers gets knocked, you've still got, 15 other players with their individuals and groups, and that group of 5 may never have existed again as that exact group anyway. That's just how it works. But one thing that I always have baked into my campaigns, and I've talked about this before on the show, is I tend to have a wider story taking place in the world of the game. So when a player's character dies, their specific story ends, and any pieces of the narrative that tied specifically into their story are gone, unfortunately. But the wider story still takes place. That translates all the way up to the level of the whole party is gone. The wider story's still going on. So if we were, to put a number to it, let's say we were 30% of the way through the story, some of the big picture revelations are just starting to be revealed, and then something awful happens, whole party's gone, we can just roll up fresh characters and rejoin the narrative at around that 30% mark, maybe coming at it from a slightly different direction.
Yeah, maybe a different faction, maybe a different side to the core conflict.
Or you can even have it something as simple as, if the party had been contracted by an individual, and that's why they were where they were, you can just say, well, that individual is hedging their bets. You weren't the only group of adventurers they were hiring. Here's this other one. And then you just pick it up straight where it left off if you really want to do it that way. You've got a lot of options, often more than you think.
Absolutely. Have you ever sent your players to the afterlife?
No, that's a classic one, isn't it?
I've always been curious about this because I know as well, you place such high value on the creation of world. And as a part of the creation of that world, the world that comes after is always curious to me. I've run a big seafaring campaign for a very long time. And we as a table have really developed what happens when you fail your death saving throws, where you go. And the whole sort of there is a deep undersea that they're as excited to explore as the overworld.
That's an interesting one because funnily enough, in a lot of my campaign structures, I actually like baking in structures that imply that, how do I put this? Death isn't working right. And we seldom actually touch on it directly, but I love having things that sort of hints at this idea that maybe souls aren't quite getting to where they need to go all the time. The reason I do that is actually a very functional one. There's a lot of, there's a lot of things in there in a lot of major systems. If we're looking at D&D 5th Ed specifically, it often, with resurrection, refers to characters needing to be willing. And it can be a way to add a level of stakes that says things don't always work 100% right. So because of the structure of the afterlife in this campaign, the person can be willing, but there might still be a fail state. It could just be a flat check. You got to roll above a 5 on a 20-sided dice, 25% chance of failure. It also means that I can narratively make it so that an NPC cannot be resurrected, even if the players would like to resurrect them. It just gives me a lot of interesting tools to change the stakes around character death as needed for the narrative at play.
Yeah.
I guess actually we'd said we were going to address it and then never did. Let's talk about that in the moment thing. So it's happened in the encounter, maybe even because you as a GM overcooked it a little bit, but everyone is wiped, everyone is dead.
Yeah.
You're an hour and a half into your 4-hour, 5-hour session. What do you do?
I mean, for me as a GM, I would immediately look to the pastoral care of the players involved as well. A different player will take player death very differently. I know that when I'm playing a TTRPG of any kind, I'm always pushing. I don't mind if my character goes often. And and if there's a particularly deadly encounter, it's the strange game of chicken that you have. And I know players who are like that, but I also know players who love their characters and are truly devastated when they pass on. So I feel like the first thing would be pastoral, and that can be done above the table. That can be done in setting at table with, I would go potentially to a wider storytelling setting,
there's a ceremony held in honor of the fallen.
Yeah, or what is how does the news change? What happens to that site? Maybe in that moment as well, because there are no player characters. I might consider opening up like a little of what happens next to the table.
Yeah, the players actually get the rare chance to take that God's eye view that we as GMs often have in private. And you can sort of lift the lid on some of the, let's now turn the camera to this place where we see, it's actually an opportunity, I find, to add little beats of resolution to characters, to character stories if you want.
A little bit like ending a campaign.
A little bit, right? Where you can, the party wipes and you go, Thrognor, you're, off in the mountains, your long-lost brother is doing this thing. And they're like, that's where my long-lost brother was. Yeah. Oh, my God. That would have been really cool to find out about, or what have you. You can deliver a little bit of resolution, a little bit of catharsis that is purely for the benefit of the players. And that's, I think, the core of this is, right, we always want the players to have fun at our tables. That's why we're doing this. So all of the structure around surviving the TPK is for the benefit of the players. And I think that leads us very comfortably to that next step, which is there's all sorts of ways you can continue a campaign in light of a TPK. But in that moment of the table, that is your opportunity to say, what do you guys want to do? Do we want to roll up a fresh batch of characters, pick up the story where it left off? Do we want to just come elsewhere into the world, maybe bump into that same narrative thread? Do we want to just stop? Do we want to just start a fresh campaign?
Yeah.
It can be an opportunity to do that, to go, all right, well, we just never see the end of that story. Roll up a new lot. See you guys here next week, and we'll start from session 1.
It's another opportunity for a session 0. And many of the things that you would discuss in a session like the OG session 0 could easily come up in that context as well. In terms of like expectations going forward, going like rebalancing pillars, or going like, okay, I was actually really interested in this. Pull on this part of the world, pull on these threads. Absolutely beautiful. I'm always waiting for the day. And you never know when it's going to come. I suppose that's why it's so good to talk and to prep it.
A little bit.
Because you don't know if it will be your fault, their fault, the place's fault on any particular day. But we know that it's the specter that hangs over a lot of these systems that have death baked in as a choice made by the dice and not by the GM, not by the player.
Yeah. I always say to my players, if I wanted you dead, you'd be dead.
Yeah.
If it were my choice, I can decide whether or not you can live or die. Like, I am all powerful in this game. I could say you have an aneurysm and drop dead on the spot if I want.
Yeah.
So if it's looking like the party is truly on the brink, I don't pull back. I don't pull the punches. Like, this is the world and this is the circumstance you found yourself in, and we're going to play it out, come what may. There's something else I want to touch on maybe for the last little bit of this episode. And it's something I call the slow TPK. Because this is something that, again, my campaigns are very resilient to because of how I structure my wide story, my sort of big stakes narrative. But it's actually not true of all campaigns. So the slow TPK, it's Ship of Theseus, right? It's like every single individual in the starting party has died at some point. What you have at the table now consists of none of the original members, and yet they're still carrying on the same story. I find that pre-made adventures are very resilient to this because you're on the set narrative path.
Yes.
And you just find ways to conveniently write in new characters. The big picture thing is still going on. And funny enough, my campaigns, despite being very sandboxy as opposed to very linear, have that same resiliency because of that big picture story. But what if you don't have that? How do you handle the quote-unquote slow TPK?
It's so interesting. This happened in my West Marches campaign. All but one character had died and come back multiple times, which was beautiful for that character because they held like the mana of the whole story in their hands. When you're shifting out little by little, I feel like your story changes fundamentally. It depends. If you've got players who are directing where the story's going to go, they will also completely change the direction. Players A, B, C, and D, characters A, B, C, and D will maybe have very different motivations to E, F, J, and I.
Yeah, no, that's how the alphabet.
That's how the alphabet rolls out. I should know this.
You're a teacher.
I am a teacher of young children, and I really
should have your alphabet down by now.
I do wonder about that because if it's player driven, player directed, that plot will shift. So you need to be resilient as a GM with how your world's going to shift in response to that.
But see, then I think there's an interesting thing that comes in, which is to do with the degree to which your players are invested in that story. Because there's every chance that they go, because I want to see where this goes, I want to roll up a character that can just pick up more or less where we left off.
Yes, that is, and often that's a great question when I'm faced with a PC who has died, to basically go, what storyline do you want to join onto, or is there a different storyline you want to join onto? Which can be a hugely cool thing. Like, you can jump onto an NPC that you're fascinated by, onto their storyline, or onto a player character and go like, I love what's been going on with your storyline. I want to now sidle up into that, and we're going to merge what's going to happen there. I
want to, I guess, put a pin in this with a final thought. That's a lie. I've actually got two final things. The first is I also think it's important when we're talking about this, and also when you are having these conversations with your players about your campaign structure, about the possibility of player death or even party death. Some campaigns just can't survive a TPK. End of. I will use again, as I have done many a time before, running a campaign styled like the Odyssey, where when I ran that campaign, if something had happened and the whole party had died,
or ship is gone,
that's it. Like, you just didn't get home.
There's not another arc.
Campaign over. Now, that would have been a problem for me in that instance, because that was a paid game and people had paid for 10 sessions.
Man, TPK in a paid game?
If they TPK'd like session 6 and I'm on the hook for 4 more, like, okay, honestly, what I would have done in that situation, because there was, I could lean on the Greek classics. All right, they're finding their way back from the afterlife. That's part of the story, right? That's always there, like, in the back pocket. But, like, if you don't want to have that, if you don't want the sort of get out of jail gimmick of fight out of the afterlife, it is totally okay to have a campaign that would just end if the party all wiped, and you say that at the top.
Yes.
And it's part of what makes that threat real, as I was talking about earlier. The final thing I want to wrap this up with, what is the deadliest encounter you've ever run?
I mean, as a rule of thumb in 5e now, I can't run an encounter that doesn't, when I do the math, say deadly at the top of it.
Yeah.
Because
right?
For the balance of that game in particular, I found that only deadly encounters are interesting for my table anymore.
Yeah.
So I often go into a game with that question of like, this could be the one, this could be the time that I overstack the dice on my side, or that's a hit bonus. But the deadliest moment that I've ever run was the final campaign of the West Marches, where it was we went in with a table of 12. And with the full knowledge that it was a war of attrition for the player side, and we had a beautiful game. We had a blast, and players risked it all continually. They'd kind of wrapped their personal storylines, and this was like the big threat, and yeah, they threw themselves into the fire for that campaign, and it was incredible. And I think maybe 5 made it out, and it was beautiful.
The deadliest one I ever did, the party just ended up in over their heads. There was a goblin problem nearby. They decided, all right, well, let's take it out at the source. Let's raid the camp. And I was very clear. I'm like, there's maybe 300 goblins that you can see moving about this camp. And they're like, all we got to do is sneak in, take out the command structure, get out. Great plan, and was definitely going to work if they could pull it off. But didn't quite go 100% smoothly. As soon as things start going on, they still got the command structure, but they were now in over their heads in a camp that was active and alert. 4 out of 7 did not make it out.
Actually, I take it back. The deadliest encounters are level 1 characters.
Yes.
That's and
they die if you look at them wrong.
You don't know how dangerous it's going to be.
Yeah.
But when you were like, goblin structure, I was like, absolutely. My players have gone into big encounters with no recon. And I've gone like, by the way, this just became incredibly dangerous for you.
I think that's put a real nice bow on it. This has been one of the coolest things to talk about, actually, because it's one of those things that we always have to bake into our games as GMs, but we never get to talk about in front of our players because it sounds like we're planning something. Oh, yeah. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we will see you in the next one. If you like what you just heard, feel free to support us on Patreon. Every little bit helps. Go to patreon.com/OneShotShow.